So, good afternoon, sir. We are starting our today meeting. Before beginning of this session, I am request to all the participants to mute their microphone and please don't use your screen sharing option between the live webinar session. Here I am requesting our host, Dr. Vinayak Desai, to proceed the further session. Dr. Vinayak, sir.
Good evening, doctors. On behalf of Daisar Medical Association, I welcome you all for the webinar of our webinar. Today's speaker is Dr. Surya Prabhakar, sir. Before that, I want to share a sad news of DMA. Our past president, Dr. Warang, sir, has passed away. To say about him a few words, I will ask Dr. Vardikar, sir, to say a few words about him. Dr. Vardikar, sir.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes,
sir. Audible.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Rajnikant Warang has left for his heavenly abode yesterday night. Dr. Warang was popularly known as Bal Warang amongst his friends and relatives. He was a leading practitioner practicing at Uttan and Daisar. Very intelligent fellow. Always used to be sincere in his work. Unique quality was used to go irrespective of holidays for his clinic, used to come for rounds after admission of the patient and get himself updated. Now Dr. Warang has served Daisar Medical Association right from the members level till president level. Like he was sports secretary, cultural secretary, then general secretary, and then president of Daisar Medical Association. He was always extra attention. He has always given extra attention to his fitness. He used to play cricket, swimmer, table tennis, and he was an avid hiker too. He was completed MBBS from Topiola National Medical College. He was senior to me by a few years, and we were extremely close friends during my 35 years of his friendship. It's very heartening to say that I have lost one of my best friends. I'm sorry to say that. I hand over this mic to Dr. Mamre, complete whatever he wants to say on that. ईश्वर त्यांच्या आत्म्यात शांती रेहो.
Dear colleagues and friends of the AMA, with a very heavy heart and sad mind, I am communicating with you on this webinar. By now, everyone must have come to know about the sad demise of Dr. Warang, Dr. Rajnikant Vasant Warang, fondly known as Dr. Bal Warang, to his friends, colleagues, relatives, and many of his patients as well, especially at Uttan. He used to practice at Uttan as well as Daisar West. His father, Dr. Vasant Warang, had set up the practice at Uttan, which was continued by Dr. Rajnikant for last 40 to 50 years. To the people of Uttan, he was not only a medical god, but an advisor, not only in medical problems, but also in their personal and social life. That was his command over the localities where he was practicing. His fond memories are with us. As Dr. Varlikar said, he served DMA in the capacity of cultural secretary, sports secretary, general secretary, and then president. Even after his presidency is over, he used to participate in DMA's activities like clinical meetings and press annual days. For last 25 days, about 25 days, he was fighting with COVID, and we just thought he was overcoming the fight, and was about to win the battle. Suddenly, events took turn for the worse, and he left us yesterday evening at about 11:45 to 12 p.m. I request all to stand in silence and pray silently for 2 minutes as an honor to departed soul. Please stand for 2 minutes, wherever you are. Okay, the 2 minutes are over. I think you can continue the webinar now. Dr. Desai,
Ah,
continue.
okay, sir. Dr. Jignesh,
Yes, now,
shall we start?
yeah, you can start.
Good evening, good evening, respected doctors. Welcome you all to our webinar. We often see family members telling about their patients' behavior. Our role is limited to counsel, and if needed, sent to the psychiatrist. To enlighten us with all the aspects, we have with us eminent leading psychiatrist from Daisar, Borivali, Dr. Sujay Prabhakar sir. To moderate the session, we have another leading psychiatrist, Dr. Devendra Savage sir from Daisar. Vote of thanks will be given by Dr. Amol Majan sir, leading gynecologist. To introduce our speaker, we have with us family physician from Daisar, Dr. Avnish Pandey. Over to Dr. Avnish.
Hello. Good evening, everybody. Dear friends, it is my great pleasure that I, Dr. Anish Pandey, active member of Daisar Medical Association, got this opportunity to introduce our today's speaker on behalf of Daisar Medical Association. Today's speaker is Dr. Sujay Prabhakar sir, MBBS, DPM, did post-graduation from Sumaya Medical College, Mumbai, attached to Mind Care Initiative Clinic, attached to Bhaktivedanta Hospital, Mira Road, and Holy Spirit Hospital, Andheri, attached to hospital in and around Daisar and Borivali. So please welcome Dr. Sujay Prabhakar sir. Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yeah, thanks for the kind introduction, Dr. Avnish Pandey. Before I begin, I would also like to share about Dr. Varan. So he's father of my good friend Yash Varan. Yash and me studied together in our college and for MBBS. We were together, and we all dearly miss him, and we have a lot of fond memories of him. So with this, we'll start our today's program. So today's session is about how to diagnose psychiatric disorders in general practice. Now, all of us see many patients in our day-to-day practice, but then which is normal? What is normal and what is abnormal? And what to consider as a psychiatric case and what to consider as a normal case, and which cases to be considered as a part of a general medical condition. So we'll be seeing about them today in a session today. So first, let's start it. So first, to begin with, I would like to share one simple thing about normal versus abnormal. Now, when do we call as something as abnormal? You know, so abnormality has to fulfill three criterias. First is any of the three criteria. It should be either deviant, or there should be distress, or there should be dysfunction. So the behavior should be deviant. For example, now we are wearing clothes. That's a normal behavior. But somebody is not wearing clothes. That is abnormal. So that is deviant behavior. So deviance. Second, there should be distress. So in anxiety, people have a lot of distress. So they have a lot of trouble. The obsessive compulsive disorder, there's a lot of distress in the patient. So deviance, distress, and the third is dysfunction. So dysfunction means I'm not able to play the role that I'm supposed to play. For example, if I'm a father, I'm not able to play the role of a father. If I'm an employee, I'm not able to function as an employee. So deviance, distress, and dysfunction, these are the three criteria for abnormality. So any of these criteria are fulfilled, that means we call the behavior as abnormal. So with this background in mind, let us begin the slides. Yes, Dr. Jignesh, next slide. Yeah, what is the difference between sadness and depression? So sadness, all of us know about. If something goes bad, we failed in exams, or we have a fight with our near and dear ones, we are sad. So sadness is temporary. Sadness goes away with time, but depression is a medical condition. Now depression doesn't go away by itself. We have to actively treat it by either therapy or medications. So next slide, Dr. Jignesh. Yeah. So when a patient of depression comes to us comes to you in your general practice, so what would you look out for? So depression, if the person's mood is depressed, person mood is sad, so you have to take care of the different points that are important. First is sad mood doesn't exist in isolation. We have to see the context and we have to see the clustering of symptoms. How the symptoms occur in context of other symptoms, and are there any other symptoms? Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing, we have to see whether the depressed mood, whether the sad mood is caused due to either substance. That is, it is caused due to either depressants or due to withdrawal of stimulants. So alcohol is a depressant, and cannabis is a depressant. So these can cause depression, and even stimulant withdrawals can cause depression. For example, cocaine withdrawal or caffeine withdrawal, or any other stimulant withdrawals can cause depression. Then we have to rule out when the person of depression comes to us. So after we ruling out substance, we have to rule out any general medical condition, GMC. So that is very important. There are many things that can cause depression. For example, if the person is taking any steroids, that can cause depression. If the person is having thyroid abnormalities, that can cause depression. The B12 deficiencies can cause depression. Any damage to the brain can cause depression. Depression is also known as pseudo dementia. So if the person appears to have symptoms of dementia, but it is not dementia, it is depression. That is pseudo dementia. So any general medical condition we have to rule out. Third thing is we have to find out whether the depression is by itself a unipolar depression or a part of a bipolar episode. Bipolar mood disorder is a disorder in which there are extreme mood swings. There is symptoms of mania followed by depression. So if the depression is a part of a bipolar disorder, the treatment becomes different. You have to add a mood stabilizer along with antidepressants. So that thing, and then once we rule this out, once we rule out the substance, the general medical condition, and whether it's a part of another disorder, then we figure out the criteria of the depression. What are the criteria of depression? You know, so there are different criteria when we call it. We don't call any sad mood as depression. So depression has to fulfill certain criteria. For example, now if the mood is sad for at least 2 weeks, first of all, the sad mood should be there for at least 2 weeks, along with 4 other symptoms to fulfill as major depressive disorder. So four other symptoms, example, either changes in sleep, changes in weight, changes in sleep, changes in weight, changes in activity level or psychomotor activity, and suicidal ideation. So along with sad mood, there should be at least 4 other criteria to fulfill the diagnosis of major depressive disorder. So there are total 9 symptoms. Out of 9 symptoms, if 5 are there, then we label it as major depressive disorder. So once the criteria gets fulfilled for major depressive disorder, then we have to see whether it is, which type of depression it is, whether it is dysthymia or it is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Now dysthymia is like a chronic depression. The person has a chronic depressive symptoms, but not full-blown depression, chronic depressive symptoms for at least 2 years. Or it is with a premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Premenstrual dysphoric disorder is a condition in which there's a depression before the onset, 1 week before the onset of menses. So we have to distinguish the type of depression. And then the depression could be also a part of adjustment disorder. For example, if there's a failure in exams and then the person has depressed mood, it could be, it is a normal reaction to a psychosocial stressor. So we won't label it as depression, you know. So maladaptive reaction to the psychosocial stressor is known as adjustment disorder. Okay. So these things we have to keep in mind before diagnosing someone as major depressive disorder. So next slide, Dr. Jinesh. Dr. Jinesh, next slide. Yeah. Yeah. So bipolar, what is the difference between mood swings and bipolar disorder? Now, all of us have mood swings. Sometimes we are happy, sometimes we are sad. But when do we label it as bipolar disorder? Now, take for instance, mania. Mania is elevated and expansive mood. You know, the person is euphoric, you're happy. Now, all of us are happy sometime or the other. If you have passed the exams, if you are married or have a child or win a lottery, we are happy. But the problem is when the happiness, when the elevated mood is without any context, you know, there's a problem. So we are happy for no reason, euphoric for no reason. So that's a problem. So what is it when we call something as mania? Next slide, Dr. Jignesh. Yeah, so in bipolar disorder, first of all, mania should be there, and mania is elevated or expansive mood and without any context. So for no reason, the patient is happy and not just happy, he's euphoric and ecstatic. You know? So when of course, we have to first distinguish between if it's caused by any substance. For example, you know, cocaine might cause euphoria, or any substance or any general medical condition should be ruled out first. That's a part of the diagnosis. Then we have to find out whether the euphoric mood is part of a manic episode. Now, to fulfill the criteria of manic episode, along with elevated mood, there are 4 other criteria. At least 4 other criteria should be fulfilled. For example, there's distractibility. Person is too much distracted. The person is grandiose. He feels like he has inflated self-esteem. The person has decreased need for sleep, so he sleeps very less, but still he's very energetic. Then there's pressure of speech. The person speaks very fast. Pressure of speech. Then there's increased psychomotor activity, you know, restlessness, agitation. There are flight of ideas, too many ideas, or racing of thoughts in the mind. So there is increased pursuit of self-destructive pleasures. Increased pursuit of self-destructive pleasures. For example, the person might have a lot of drinks, or maybe smoke a lot, or buy a lot of things, or maybe go on binge eating. So if 4 of these criteria are fulfilled, then we label it as manic episode. Okay? And once we label it as manic episode, then we have to find out whether it's actually mania or hypomania. Now, what is the difference between mania and hypomania? In mania, the person is not able to function, not able to carry out day-to-day tasks. Whereas in hypomania, the person is still functioning. In fact, sometimes the person is functioning better also. His activities are better also. Is more oriented towards goal-directed activities. Those are different. But single episode of mania is known as bipolar disorder. We don't call it separate, even though bipolar is ideally mania plus depression, but single episode of mania is also labeled as bipolar disorder. Now, why? The reason is because mania is usually followed by depression. So the treatment course, the family history, and the genetic loading all suggests of bipolar disorder. So that's why single episode of mania is also known as bipolar disorder. Now, so then if along with mania there are symptoms of delusions and hallucinations, there are psychotic symptoms, then we label it as bipolar disorder with psychotic symptoms. And then there is a disorder known as cyclothymia, in which there are mood swings, but they are not, so mood swings are alternating between mania and depression, but they are not so severe so as to have the typical criteria of mania or depression. Then we label it as cyclothymia. So this is in short about bipolar disorder. Next, Dr. Jignesh. Yeah, worry versus anxiety. Now, all of us worry a lot. We worry about finances, we worry about health, we worry about future. So when do we label it as disorder? Now, worrying is normal, but at times we are not able to control our worries. So worries become excessive and pervasive, and then they lead to anxiety. So anxiety can have various physical, cognitive, and behavioral symptoms. Now, physical symptoms of anxiety are, the person is, there's shortness of breath, there is palpitations, there is tremors. So these are the physical symptoms of anxiety. Cognitive symptoms of anxiety are the person is distracted a lot, is not able to make decisions, is not able to focus. They're the cognitive symptoms of anxiety. And the behavioral symptoms of anxiety are the person is pacing around, he's restless, fidgety, biting nails. So there are physical, cognitive, and behavioral symptoms of anxiety. So worries can lead to anxiety, but but anxiety is normal. And before the exams, students have anxiety. Before deadlines, any deadlines, employees have anxiety. So no, so that we don't label it as abnormal. Anxiety is normal. But if anxiety is functionally impairing, if the anxiety impairs with our day-to-day functions, and if it goes on for at least 6 months, then we label it as generalized anxiety disorder. Yeah. So next slide, Dr. Jignesh. Yeah, generalized anxiety disorder. Then next slide. Yeah. So when do we call as panic disorder? So what is panic? Panic is sudden, discrete symptoms of anxiety. Sudden episodes of discrete symptoms of intense anxiety. So that is known as panic. Next slide, Dr. Jignesh. Yeah. So panic disorder is small symptoms of sudden intense anxiety are known as panic attacks. Now, when a person presents with panic attacks, we have to rule out whether the person has taken any substance, for example, caffeine, or any stimulants. The stimulants lead to increased panic attacks. And we have to rule out any general medical condition that may have caused panic attacks. For example, hyperthyroidism may cause panic attacks, pheochromocytoma may cause panic attacks. So we have to do investigations accordingly. Then panic attacks are commonly associated with mitral valve prolapse. It's a correlated finding. There's no reason for it, but it is associated with it. Now, once we know somebody has panic attacks, we have to find out whether the person has a panic disorder or not. Now, what is panic disorder? Panic disorder, the panic attacks occur out of the blue. There's no specific reason for panic attacks. The panic attacks occur out of the blue. So one thing, and second thing, there are anticipatory anxiety. So the person waits that he might get panic attack later. The anticipatory anxiety occurs, and there's change in behavior related to the attacks. So the person is more cautious about himself. They may check the BPN again. They may do blood tests again and again. And there is associated agoraphobia. So when the panic attacks occur out of the blue, they are associated with anticipatory anxiety, and there's change in behavior related to attacks, then we label it as panic disorder. And panic disorder is associated with agoraphobia. So we label as panic disorder with or without agoraphobia. Now, agoraphobia means phobia or fear of going to places where escape is difficult. For example, if I go in a local train and if I have a panic attack, so I might not be able to, there might not be any help available. So I might stay at home. I might not go out of my home only. So that is agoraphobia. So panic disorder is with or without agoraphobia. And then if any panic attacks are there, we have to see the precipitating factors. Are there any precipitating factors of the factor, or it has occurred out of the blue? Sometimes precipitating factors are some phobias or separation anxiety, that is separation from major attachment figures, or illness anxiety, there's fear of having illness, or post-traumatic stress disorder, or because of trauma, there is panic attacks. And then so these are the major factors in diagnosing panic disorders. The next slide, Dr. Jinesh. Yeah, fear versus phobia. So what is the difference between fear and phobia? Now, if there's a snake out there, everybody will be scared. That's normal. If you are standing on height, all of us are scared. But if there's something that's non-threatening and still we are scared, that is phobia. So phobia is excessive and irrational fear of something that is non-threatening. Something that should not be threatening. So if a tiger comes, we all will be afraid. But if a cockroach is there and still we are afraid, that is phobia. So we are all of us are afraid of sometimes a cockroach also. But people with phobia cannot stand the sight of cockroach. Yes, sir. So then phobia. So, but when do we have to treat phobia? When it is functionally impairing. For example, if a person has a phobia of snakes, so snakes occur in zoo. So that for that the person need not be treated because snakes are in zoo. But if there's a social phobia, so social phobia is very much functionally impairing. So when the person comes in contact with others, he feels that everybody is scrutinizing him. So that time the person needs treatment because he has to function in social life. So social phobia, so phobia are selectively treated if they are really functionally impairing. Otherwise, treatment need not be there. Next slide, Rajesh. Illness anxiety versus somatic symptom disorder. Now, there's something called as illness anxiety. Illness anxiety is fear of having illness. For example, now everybody has a fear of having COVID illness. Earlier, it used to be called hypochondriasis. Now it's known as illness anxiety. And somatic symptom disorder means there is a symptom, for example, symptom of pain or generalized symptom of fatigue. So there's a symptom and there's no pathology. Yeah. Either there's a symptom and there's no pathology behind it, and the person complains of symptom. For example, excessive pain, constantly person who complains of excessive pain, or the pathology is mild, but the symptoms are severe. For example, in diabetes, the person has tingling numbness in hands and legs, but the diabetes doesn't explain so severe tingling numbness of hands and legs. Sometimes the numbness is very extensive and the person is distressed. So then it is somatic symptom disorder. So next slide. So when a person comes with illness anxiety, he or she has fear of having illness. So the person who has already diagnosed his or her condition, they feel if they have a chest pain, they feel they have a heart attack. If they have headache, they feel they have brain tumor. So they come to doctors with diagnosis. They Google a lot, and they they themselves suggest many investigations. In somatic symptom disorder, there's preoccupation with the body symptom, maybe some aches and pains, maybe fatigue, maybe heaviness. There's preoccupation with a body symptom. So if patients with illness anxiety or somatic symptom disorder comes, we have to first rule out any substance or general medical condition that may be causing it. Sometimes anxiety can manifest in the form of somatic symptom disorder. For example, in anxiety, there are a lot of physical symptoms like palpitations or shortness of breath or feeling heaviness or dizziness. So now these somatic symptoms may be a part of anxiety disorder like panic disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. Somatic symptoms could also be a part of psychotic disorder. For example, somatic delusions. So if there are bizarre somatic symptoms, for example, I feel there are insects walking in my head. So if there are bizarre symptoms, then it could be a somatic delusion. Then there's also a body dysmorphic disorder, which is preoccupation with imagined defect in appearance. For example, the patient says, my nose is abnormal, I want to do a plastic surgery, or my chin is abnormal, I want to do a plastic surgery. So body dysmorphic disorder should be ruled out. And lastly, convergent disorder. So if the patient presents with somatic symptoms and the somatic symptoms are mainly of neurological origin, for example, paralysis or seizure-like symptoms without actual pathology, then it is convergent disorder. Thus, we rule out somatic symptoms and illness anxiety disorder. Next slide. Adjustment disorder versus post-traumatic stress disorder. So what is post-traumatic stress disorder? Now, many patients are admitted in ICU. We are seeing, and they experience near-death experience during COVID times. Many patients are admitted in ICU and they experience something like near-death experience, and they have something called as post-traumatic stress disorder. So, what is post-traumatic stress disorder? For PTSD for short, or post-traumatic stress disorder, the trauma has to be of a severe origin. The trauma has to be out of context. For example, uh, the trauma should be either life threatening, for example natural disasters or earthquakes or bomb blasts. It should be life threatening, or there should be sexual violence like rape, etc. So the trauma has to be really life threatening, and then there are other symptoms. Whereas in adjustment disorder, the trauma may not be life threatening. In adjustment disorder, the trauma may be day-to-day events, for example divorce or a job loss, etc. So then what are the symptoms? When do we diagnose as post-traumatic stress disorder? Next slide. Yeah, in post-traumatic disorder, once the trauma is of severe nature, then the reaction of the person determines whether the person is suffering from PTSD or not. The reaction involves intrusive symptoms. There are many symptoms that are intrusive. They come in the form of flashbacks or nightmares or dreams. Then there is avoidance behavior. The person wants to avoid the reminders of the trauma. They want to not remember. They want to avoid the people, place, or activities associated with the trauma. And there's increased arousal. So the person is hyper vigilant and hyperactive, and almost on the edge. Uh, so there may be startle response. So these criteria are for post-traumatic stress disorder. So if the symptoms are for more than 1 month, then it is PTSD. If the symptoms are for less than 1 month, it is acute stress disorder. So the post-traumatic stress disorder can be differentiated from other disorders, like there is like obsessive compulsive disorder. OCD has intrusive symptoms, but in OCD there is no trauma. And in generalized anxiety disorder, there's a lot of arousal and physical symptoms, but there is no trauma again. So even adjustment disorder is a psychosocial reaction, is a maladaptive reaction to a psychosocial stressor. So it is a last diagnosis. So if any DSM-5, any diagnostic criteria is fulfilled, we first label that diagnostic criteria. For example, if the criteria for depression is fulfilled, we label depression first. But if the criteria for depression is not fulfilled and the person is still functionally impaired, then we label it as adjustment disorder. So adjustment disorder is a diagnosis of exclusion. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, obsessive compulsive disorder. So when do we? So what are the criteria for obsessive compulsive disorder? So firstly, there should be obsessions. Next slide. Firstly, there should be obsessions. Now, what are obsessions? Obsessions are thoughts, impulses, or images which are repetitive, intrusive, and distressing. So they are repetitive thoughts, impulses, or images. There are obsessions. Now, for example, thoughts of contamination, like my hands are dirty, or thoughts of or obsession of doubt that my door is not locked, or what if the robber comes in my house, or my gas is not put off. Also there is contamination, there is doubt, obsession of doubt. There are religious obsessions. The person feels they have transgressed a religious doctrine. Then there are compulsions. Compulsions are any mental or physical acts that are performed to neutralize obsessions, to reduce obsessions, or they may be performed rigidly. So compulsions are like, if the obsession is of contamination, compulsion is of washing. If there's an obsession of doubt, compulsion is of checking. So compulsions are in response to obsessions so as to reduce or neutralize the obsessions, but they may be according to the rules that must be applied rigidly. For example, there's compulsion of counting or compulsion of praying. The person keeps on counting, and if they have not counted properly, they'll again keep on counting. Or person may pray repetitively, and if they don't pray, they feel something bad might happen. So obsessions and compulsions. So once we diagnose something as OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, then we have to rule out whether there's proper insight or not. Whether the person, usually in OCD, what happens is the person himself realizes there's something wrong with him, so they want to go to doctors. They want to show to somebody. because they are tired of those thoughts, repetitive thoughts. They are tired themselves, so they want to show. But there's OCD with poor insight. So in this poor insight, people don't realize that they are obsessive. They feel that thoughts are right. For example, they may continuously washing their hands and cleaning themselves, but they feel that what they do is right because the germs can definitely harm them. So with poor insight, we have to find out. So if the OCD is with poor insight, that means is more towards psychotic spectrum. Then with tics, we have to specify obsessive compulsive disorder usually is comorbid with other disorders. Like commonly, it is comorbid with depression, and that's why sometimes we misdiagnose OCD. We don't properly diagnose it. So depression is commonly associated with OCD. Second commonly associated with OCD is panic disorder. Then thirdly is body dysmorphic disorder, and fourthly there's generalized anxiety disorder. So we have to understand these comorbid features with OCD. Otherwise, the diagnosis we might miss the diagnosis. And OCD, there are spectrum OCD disorders also. So obsessive compulsive disorder is a typical washing, cleaning, but there are spectrum disorders. For example, there's trichotillomania or pulling of one's hair. So repeated urge or impulse to pull one's hair. There is trichotillomania. This is one of the spectrum disorder. Then even excoriation disorder or skin picking disorder. The person may feel like picking one's skin, and there may be repeated attempts to stop it. So we have to be aware of those OCD spectrum disorders also, which can be treated in the line of OCD. Next slide. Yeah, forgetfulness versus dementia. Now, many of us forget a lot, and that may be because we are preoccupied with something or the other. Like we are absent-minded at times because there may be something else running in our mind. So that's normal. So sometimes in depression, the people become more forgetful, and that is also known as pseudo dementia that we discuss. So to depression, along with in depression, there's some amount of cognitive impairment that may show symptoms of forgetfulness. But in dementia, what happens is the person doesn't realize that he's forgetting. So the person forgets that he's forgetting. So if you ask a person with dementia, what is your date today, or what is your neighbor's name, the person may tell some other name or tell some other date. So they may confabulate. So the person forgets that he forgets, and there's typically recent memory loss. So the person may remember old things, what happened years ago, but they may forget the current things. What is happening maybe last night, what they had for dinner, they might forget that. So there's recent memory loss. So one thing for dementia is memory impairment, that is inability to remember the learned information or to learn new information. So learning impairment may be there, and there are other symptoms which fulfill the criteria for dementia. But before diagnosing dementia, we have to rule out other reversible causes. So we'll see what are the reversible causes of dementia. Next slide. Yeah, so there are reversible causes of dementia. The mnemonic for it is dementia itself. So D for drugs, we have to many benzodiazepines cause dementia-like symptoms. Even anticholinergics cause dementia-like symptoms. E for the emotional cause, that is depression. Whether dementia is depression, so it's reversible. So first we have to find out reversible causes so that we can treat those causes and make the person back to normal. And then if it is irreversible, then we have to find out which type of dementia it is. So what are the reversible causes? One is drugs, other is emotional cause, third is metabolic cause. There may be some metabolic or endocrine causes which may lead to dementia. For example, hypothyroidism can cause dementia like symptoms. Then E for ears and eyes, decrease hearing or decrease seeing, which may lead to symptoms of dementia. Then N for normal pressure hydrocephalus. Normal pressure hydrocephalus is commonly found out in MRI, and the treatment is very simple, and immediately the dementia reverses. Then T for tumor, I for infection, and A for anemia. Anemia, that is due to vitamin B12 deficiency, or B12 deficiency may cause dementia-like symptoms. So these are the reversible causes of dementia. And once we diagnose something as dementia, then we have to find out which type of dementia it is. So the dementia without any cause is Alzheimer's disease. Without any organic cause is Alzheimer's. So it's Alzheimer's is slow degenerative disease. Then there is, if there's a vascular insult or there's a stroke or a cardiac condition, then it is vascular dementia. Then if there are symptoms, if there are marked personality symptoms, Before memory impairment occurs, there's marked personality symptoms, then we label it as frontotemporal dementia. And if there are hallucinations, we label it as Lewy body dementia, more of hallucinations. So this is about dementia. The next, yeah, ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So when do we call this something as ADHD? So many children are energetic. They have a lot of energy in them. They throw a lot of tantrums sometimes. They don't sit in one place. But we don't label it as ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So ADHD has to have certain criteria of symptoms to be labeled. So after that, we can consider maybe starting medicines or therapy. So what are the symptoms for ADHD? So there have to be 6 out of 9 symptoms for inattention and 6 out of 9 symptoms for hyperactivity and impulsivity. So ADHD is diagnosed as ADHD with inattentive type or ADHD with hyperactive impulsive type. So what are the inattention symptoms? Inattention symptoms are the child doesn't appear to listen. So the child may make silly mistakes, or child may be disorganized, or forget things in class, or make careless mistakes in his schoolwork. So these are the symptoms of inattention. So if 6 out of 9 are fulfilled, then we label it as inattention. And what are the symptoms of hyperactivity and impulsivity? The symptoms are the person cannot sit in one place. The child cannot sit in one place. He fidgets and squirms. He's restless, always moving around. He just climbs something. He blurts out answers. He cannot wait for his turn. So these are the symptoms of hyperactivity, impulsivity. So if 6 out of 9 of inattention and hyperactive impulsivity, the criteria gets fulfilled, we label it as ADHD. But ADHD symptoms have to be present in two or more, at least two settings. At least two settings. For example, home and school. So the child may be hyperactive at school, but not at home. So that hyperactivity at school may be because he doesn't like studies. That's maybe the reason. So we don't label it as ADHD. For labeling as ADHD, there should be at least two settings, and the age should be 6 to 12 years, because below 6 years the child is naturally hyperactive and should be. So we don't diagnose it as ADHD. The age should be 6 to 12 years for it to be diagnosed as ADHD. So ADHD, sometimes what happens, even in ADHD, the people are able to focus on some things. For example, they are able to focus on mobile phones or some gadgets or some sports or something. So then the parents are confused. How come they are ADHD when they can focus so good on mobile phones or something? But in ADHD, there's something known as hyperfocus, which allows them to focus on one or two activities which they love. And there's hyperfocus. Next. Yeah, this is the last slide, and these are how to rule out psychotic symptoms. Now, for ruling out psychotic symptoms, there has to be either delusions or hallucinations. Now, to fulfill the criteria of schizophrenia, there has to be delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, disorganized or catatonic behavior, and negative symptoms. So either two of these criteria fulfill the diagnosis for schizophrenia. So we'll take each of them. So what are delusions? So when do we call as delusions? When are they really abnormal? And when are delusions normal, and when are they part of a psychotic episode? So we'll see next slide. Yeah, so delusions is what? Delusions is basically a fixed false belief which is not in keeping with the culture of a person and not believed by any subculture, and believed by the person despite evidence to the contrary. So now suppose somebody believes that Earth is flat, but suppose it's a part of a fake news. So fake news is believed by many people, so it is not a delusion. Even religious beliefs have no proof, but they are not delusions because it's believed by subculture. So any belief that a person believes, which is not believed by anybody else, and the person firmly believes it to be true, that is delusions. So for example, the person feels that my wife may be having an affair with somebody. So that is delusion of infidelity. That may be plausible. A person may feel that somebody is trying to attack me or harm me, when in reality this may not be so. That is delusion of persecution. The person has grandiose delusion sometimes. He or she feels they have exceptional ability or exceptional wealth and fame. That is grandiose delusions. Then the person may have somatic delusions. They may feel there is some insects in my head. Somatic delusions. The person may have nihilistic delusions. They may feel that the world is going to end. So these are delusional, they're different delusions. So when there's single delusions, we label it as part of delusional disorder, and the person is functioning normally with those delusions. But when do we but if delusions are bizarre, so these are plausible delusions, that that somebody may be after me, or grandiose delusion, these are plausible, these can happen. But there are bizarre delusions. When the delusions are bizarre, they are part of schizophrenia, or if the delusions exist with other psychotic symptoms like hallucinations and disorganized speech, then they are labeled it as schizophrenia. Okay, so when there's a delusion, we have to first rule out the organic cause, whether there are any organic causes. Now, second is hallucination. Now, hallucination is again perception without stimulus, sensory perception without external stimulation. That is hallucination. So you hear voices and you see nobody's there. You see something and nobody's there. You smell something and nothing is there. So these are hallucinations. So there are visual hallucinations, there are auditory hallucinations, there are olfactory hallucinations, there are gustatory hallucinations, there are tactile hallucinations. So all senses, all five senses can give rise to hallucinations. Now, for some, once there is hallucinations, we have to rule out whether hallucinations are organic or they are functional. There are organic hallucinations. So there may be some abnormality, the physical abnormality when there are hallucinations. For example, commonly with visual hallucinations, with olfactory and gustatory. So we have to rule out physical cause. There may be some tumor in the brain. So we have to do MRI or some more investigations we have to do. But when we don't label as something as hallucinations, hallucinations could be part of a non-psychotic episode, and hallucinations could be normal when they could be normal when it is a part of a hypnagogic or a hypnopompic episode. For example, while going to sleep, the person may have hallucinations, so they are normal hallucinations. If a person uses hallucinogen, for example, if a person uses LSD, they may get hallucinations. So it's a normal experience. And it's if the hallucinations are a part of a ritual or a religious ceremony, for example, I can hear the voice of a dead person, so then it's a normal again, because it's a part of religious ceremony. And if there are pseudo hallucinations, for example, in conversion disorder, the people have multiple sensory hallucinations, so again that is normal. So these are non-psychotic hallucinations. So if the hallucinations are not organic and non-psychotic, and then we may label it as a part of schizophrenia, and then we have to treat accordingly. So with this, I come to an end of it, and hope all of us can at least diagnose the basics of psychiatric disorders. And definitely, I would like to take more questions, and we'll clarify the doubts if there are any.
Devendra Save, sir.
Yes, very, very nice presentation. Very clear. Has clarified. And in such a short time, Dr. Sujay could speak about each and every disorder, almost every disorder which is there, and give us just the important points, which if we keep in our mind and remember, we will be able to diagnose almost all the cases properly. And he has also helped us to differentiate between the normal psychological happenings in our day-to-day life versus the psychiatric disorders, how they have to be differentiated. Now, Dr. Sujay, we have some questions from the audience for you. So, yes. So, first question which is there is basically some drugs which you can tell, which will help people in practice. Now that you have made it so clear for them, you need not tell about every disorder, but I would say that at least for main disorders like depressive disorder, anxiety disorder,
right,
these two disorders, at least you can tell us which drugs can be used at GP level. Maybe some blend also, some dose also. May turn out to be a little easy.
Right, sir. So if there is depression and there's anxiety, so in depression, first line of treatment is SSRIs, because it's very safer ones. So they have no anticholinergic side effects, no sleepiness, no drowsiness, and they can be safely used in very low doses. Now, SSRIs or serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So there are 5 SSRIs. So 5 I'll mention each one of them. There's fluoxetine, there's paroxetine, there's sertraline, there's escitalopram, and there's fluoxamine. So these are 5 SSRIs. So out of them, commonly used is now the escitalopram is commonly used because escitalopram is a very safe medicine and no drug-to-drug interactions, no drowsiness. The other one commonly used is fluoxetine. Now, escitalopram and fluoxetine can be safely used in even comorbidity, even old patients for depression, and they work very well. Only in young patients, we have to look out for rising of suicidal ideations. And commonly for anxiety disorders, there are many benzodiazepines which we can use, but we use benzodiazepines for short amount of duration. For example, 2 to 3 weeks we use. So there's now there are short acting and long acting benzodiazepines. So for something which is there's something like a panic attack, we might use alprazolam, which is short acting. But there's long standing anxiety, for example, generalized anxiety disorder, we might use something like clonazepam. But nonetheless, these benzodiazepines are used for short duration, 2 to 3 weeks or maximum 1 month, and then we taper it and stop it. Otherwise, there are many side effects for benzodiazepines. So commonly we used antidepressants and anti-anxiety medicines, that is antidepressants and benzodiazepines together, and then we taper off benzodiazepines and continue antidepressants.
Okay, one more common problem which doctors face in their general practice is having unnecessary physical symptoms, what you diagnose as somatization disorder, which the general practitioner knows that this is something which is not in tune with the patient's reports and PSY hai. So in that, what are the drugs which you would suggest? Pains, aches,
Right.
giddiness, dizziness, low BP, chakkar,
Right.
ghabraman, all
Right.
these things.
So
there,
first,
what do you suggest?
right. So there are many non-specific symptoms that patient present with, maybe dizziness, pains, aches and pains and all. So then, and so first is good to rule out any physical condition. So maybe MRI or any physical test to be
Already
done.
ruled out.
And
They have already ruled out.
already
They are
done,
very
right?
sure it is PSY. So what
Right,
would you say?
right. So the
What
reassurance
would you
is important that they want first is, and they want constant reassurance they seek. Then after giving them reassurance, then they would like to, of course, start a proper line of medications. So ideally, good thing to be started in them is SNRIs, serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. They work very well in somatization disorders. So there are SNRIs like duloxetine, venlafaxine, and milnacipram is not anymore in use now. But these two SNRIs work very well. So they increase the serotonin and norepinephrine levels, and the perception of pain changes, because pain has emotional as well as physical component. So the perception towards pain changes, and the person responds very well once.
Another question which has come from the audience is that how would you treat postpartum psychosis?
Right. So postpartum psychosis is could be dangerous because it could be harmful to the child also, not only to the mother, to the child also, like the psychosis after delivery. It can take in the form of delusions or hallucinations. Now, first of all, we have to separate the child and mother, and maybe bottle feed the mother. Then we have to give antipsychotics to mother. Now, antipsychotics are a treatment of choice. There are typical antipsychotics and atypical antipsychotics. We can prefer either one. So usually atypical antipsychotics are used because they are latest ones and they don't cause extrapyramidal symptoms. And once we use it, the response is very nice. The patients respond in say 3-4 days. Sometimes they are not ready to take oral medications. We give them injectables, and they show good response.
Right. In short, if there is a postpartum psychosis, rather refer to Dr. Sujay. He'll treat it in a much better way. One last question, which I would ask you, is that what is the difference between which is although it's a very for Sujay it would be a very simple question, but many people get confused here. What is the difference between psychologist and psychiatrist, and where do we send a patient to a psychologist and where do we send a patient to psychiatrist?
Right. So, psychiatrist is with a medical degree. They can prescribe medicines. Psychologists don't have medical degree, so they counsel the patients basically. So, usually, some lot of times we are confused where to send the patient. Either one they can send. Most of the medical disorders, most of the psychiatric disorders are best treated with a combination of psychiatry as well as psychology, with a combination of medications as well as counseling. So we usually do that with combination of medicines and counseling. We treat the patient, and that's the best response that we give to the patient. But if we are confused, definitely you can send to either psychologist or psychiatrist. We can direct the patient towards our respective colleagues.
Right. And one last question: you being a sports person, what is the role of sports in psychological health? Yoga, meditation, sports, especially sports.
Sports.
You being
Right.
such a strong
Right.
sports person. You can
So,
give us a little bit of insight and how it works.
yeah. So a lot of this stress causes a lot of anxiety and depression. Now, anxiety, a lot of mind works. The mind works, and there's a lot of adrenaline that is generated in the body. Now, this adrenaline causes a lot of stress and anxiety. Adrenaline and cortisol are the stress hormones. So when we are into sports, physical sports, this adrenaline is utilized to our so that helps in muscle development, or it helps in so the cortisol is utilized. So ultimately, what happens when our body works, our mind calms down. So it's a basic theory. So sports uh, help in calming the stress down. Not only that, it helps in generating endorphins, which make us feel better. Endorphins are the endogenous morphins that make us feel better. And not only the exercise is not just for the body, sports are not just for the body; they are for the mind also. So they help in neuroplasticity, that is generating new neurons in the brain. So sports help in many ways. So not only releasing the neurochemicals in the brain, maybe serotonin, norepinephrine, but even the generating new neurons. And sports are very much good stress busters in our day-to-day hectic lives.
Okay, two, three more questions have come. So do we take them?
Yes, sir.
So one question which is being asked is that do newer antipsychotics cure schizophrenia or give a better control in schizophrenia? What would you say?
The schizophrenia and bipolar disorders, they are manageable and treatable, but they are not curable. So they are more of genetic abnormalities. They are just like blood pressure or hypertension. So they cannot be cured completely, but they can be treated and managed well. So the person has to be on regular medicines. If there are more relapses, the illness becomes more treatment resistant, and then we have to go for more amount of medications or injectables, or sometimes we have to admit the person in rehab centers.
Another question is that whether postpartum psychosis will continue forever.
Not necessary. If adequately treated at the right time, the postpartum psychosis does dissipate and the person becomes better. In fact, usually when there's first episode of psychosis, we give treatment for a year and then taper the medicines and see whether the person relapses. And usually it goes by itself, but sometimes the person doesn't completely come out of it, and then we have to continue treatment for a long time. But usually the person doesn't require long-term treatment for postpartum psychosis.
And one person has also asked whether duloxetine can be advised by general practitioners. I think
Yes,
there
sir.
is no harm in
No harm in because it takes care of both pain as well as depression. So it can, so any amount of even somatic symptoms. So any somatization with the background of anxiety and depression, it works very well. So duloxetine is very much prescribed. Only some few
duloxetine
things.
is advised by orthopedic surgeon
Yes,
as
absolutely,
compared to psychiatrist.
absolutely. Only some side effects maybe they have to take care of, like anticholinergic side effects. Maybe they're little, not much, but sometimes it may be there. That's it. Otherwise, it's very safe to start.
So excellent presentation, Dr. Sujay, and such clear answers. I think most of the questions have been very, very clearly answered. Any further? One last question about postpartum psychosis. I think you should have taken one small section on it. So whether if it is not treated, then what happens is the question which has come.
Then the person may that function, that there may be functional abnormalities. The person may hear voices, and they could be talking to themselves or muttering to themselves. So they may not
It
be
may
able to
end up into
participate in
schizophrenia, is
schizophrenia.
what
It
you
may
mean
lead
to
to
say.
schizophrenia. Yes, sir.
It may end up into schizophrenia.
Lead to schizophrenia. Right.
There are smaller chances that it may spontaneously recover. There are more chances that it may go into psychosis, schizophrenia.
Right.
So excellent question, answers to the questions, very to the point, precise as your presentation was. Even your presentation was very precise, to the point, and full of knowledge. Every line had some meaning behind it. So much nice. Thank you so much, Dr. Sujay. And I would request Dr. Vignesh to take over the meeting.
Okay, thank you, sir. Friends, so
Thank
I
you,
get
sir.
to know any more questions are remaining. It is very interesting and a very informative question answer session. So thank you, Dr. Sujay Prabhu sir, and Dr. Devendra Save, sir. Now here I am requesting our chairperson, Dr. Amol Mahajan, sir, to give the vote of thanks. Dr. Amol Mahajan, sir.
Hello everyone. On behalf of Daisar Medical Association, I would like to congratulate and thank today's speaker, Dr. Sujay Prabhugaonkar, for a very informative session. It was a very lucid and detailed presentation. I also thank today's moderator, Dr. Save sir. I am sure our doctors would be psychologically more prepared now to tackle these various psychiatric conditions in day-to-day practice and refer them to the specialist at the appropriate time. We all know it is very easy to label anyone as a psychiatric patient or a PSY case, but it is very difficult to treat one. I also take this opportunity to thank the DMA and the organizers for organizing this lecture on a very important topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Amol Mahajan, sir. And dear friends, today is our 11th webinar of series of the Dr. Sujay Prabhugaonkar sir is delivering excellent lecture to us and updating our knowledge about psychiatric disorder in our general practice. So it will be very useful in our practice also. So thank you, Dr. Sujay sir, Dr. Devendra
Thanks a
sir,
lot.
Dr. Anand Mahambre sir, Dr. Umesh Varlikar sir, Dr. Avinash sir, Dr. Amol Mahajan sir, and Dr. Vinayak sir. Once again, a deep condolence to our Dr. R.V. Warang sir from our all DMA doctor fraternity. And behalf of Daisar Medical Association, here I am Dr. Jignesh Vasant Chauhan, announce the end of today's webinar session. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.